In our previous presentation, we talked about introducing farming into the area of Mesopotamia, and now we're going to see how farming has created a civilization, talk about Sumerian civilization and Sumerian culture. In the year 3000 BC, we see Sumerians building several cities. The political unit the Sumerians kind of coalesce into is what's called the city-state. And we'll dive deeper into this particular form of government when we get to the Greeks in a couple units. But a city-state is a city and its surrounding lands that functions as its own independent political unit. If we're flying our drone over the top of a Sumerian city-state, and or we're flying over in an airplane, what we would see in the time period is a city surrounded by walls. Then outside those walls, the city would be ringed with fields of wheat and barley. The farmers would farm those crops and then bring them into the city to sell, to distribute, to pay taxes with. Quick thing to understand when we're talking about the Sumerian city-states and Sumerian culture is that these city-states are all independently of each other. You don't identify as Sumerian, and this is even more of a historical term by historians rather than the people themselves. You would consider yourself where you're from. I'm from Urk, I'm from Kish, I'm from Lagash, I'm from Umma, and I'm from Ur. Right? And all these places, as we'll see, are very much pitted against each other for the few resources of the area. So we're going to talk about an overarching Sumerian culture, but understand that that's not as what maybe each individual city-state would have considered that. There is no greater Sumeria. There's these individual city-states that have slightly different cultures, but again, if we're talking about from a freshman and world history point of view, we can very much generalize amongst them. Now, for physically each city-state, the center of each city was a large religious temple complex that kind of functioned as the political, religious, judicial center of the city. And with that, with the centrality of this religious temple complex, leads right into these early city-states governments were run by temple priests. I mean, you've been hammered into your head since elementary school the ideas of kings and presidents and prime ministers. The temple priests of ancient Samaria are going to be the ones who are in charge. And they get to be in charge. The rationale is that they are the go-betweens for the people to the gods, and these priests are the ones who, working between the gods and the people, help ensure a successful harvest. And as we'll get a little bit into how successful or guaranteed or repeated we can get a harvest within Mesopotamia, we'll see how a good priest who's able to, guarantees a bad word, but kind of consistently get a successful harvest is going to be very much looked upon as a helpful person in society. Now, these priests, as their functions as kind of running the quote-unquote government, are going to help manage the very various and assorted and complex irrigation works to be able to keep, trap, and then bring water to the fields where it needs, as well as collecting taxes. Taxes in the form usually as kind of sacrifices to the gods, but then you're used for other different purposes. Then be able, we talked about to run the government. A government runs by collecting revenue. One way to collect revenue is to collect taxes from its people and then provide services from those taxes to the people through the money or crops or whatever that they've collected. So you can go on Google Images or wherever we have you and try to find the best example of a city-state. But again, very simply, if we break out the laser pointer, it's going to be walled around it. It's going to have houses and marketplace, and again, the religious temple complex is going to be the big one there. Now, as we said, most of these city-states are going to be located along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, so be pretty close, if not right on there. And again, we see the city of Ur as an example here in 1927, as well as a more artistic representation of a Sumerian city-state. So a couple key takeaways. One, we see them right on the Tigris and right on the Euphrates going all the way up to the Persian Gulf. We also want to understand that there is a lot of these different city-states in a pretty small area. When these rivers are flooding, they're depositing not only the water, but the silt built within them. So we're going to think of these are very muddy, very brown rivers. When that water evaporates away, you're left with the rich silt. And that allows for these fields to, within these deserts, to have fertile fields. But there is just so much fertile land here. And so we're going to see this breed a lot of conflict and wars between these city-states for a very long time just because of the amount of them in a relatively small space. Book dives nearly for a half a section, just giving the city of Ur as an example of one of these city-states. City of Ur is located on the Euphrates River in modern-day southern Iraq. By 3000 BC, it's a thriving urban center. There's 30,000 people living in the city. We have to take a step back and look at this from a point of view of 2024. There's simply not that many humans total on the entire globe. To get 30,000 of them in one place and feed them and clothe them and relatively be able to keep them safe is a major achievement. Now, as we said, the center of most Sumerian city-states and the center of Ur is now different, was a temple. And the big buildings that the quote unquote Sumerians are building, and we see these throughout these different city-states, are the temples to their gods, and those temples are called ziggurats. Ziggurat translates as mountain of God, and it kind of acts as a couple of different things. We'll go into a specific one in a second, but is believed really to be the kind of the home of the god. You can kind of go when he's visiting on Earth. You can go and visit them and do that. But when we see specific ziggurats, they also have other functions as well. So the best example and one that's relatively still standing today is the ziggurat of Ur, and a ziggurat, again, a pyramid-shaped monument. If we take a look, it's not exactly your ancient Giza pyramids, but it very much kind of is replicating that same. This is a very easy engineering building to build. It's a big box with a smaller box and a smaller box and a smaller box stacked on top of it. So it's pretty easy to get tall with a building like this. It's not a lot of complex engineering. It's not hard to build. The ziggurat of Ur is 210 feet long, 150 feet wide, and 100 feet tall. So if you think about this from the like a standard story in the United States today is about 10 feet, you're looking at a 10-story tall building built 5,000 years ago. There's a significant time in Earth's history where this is the tallest building on Earth. So this is a big deal. It's pretty impressive that they were able to do this. And specifically, this was built for the moon god in 21 BC. It's used for religious rituals, as we said, for the moon god when they come visit, as well as storage for grains, fabrics, and gems offered not just as sacrifice to the gods, but also as a way to kind of hold the resources in case of famine or floods, what have you. So Ur is again similar. We could do this with all the city states. Again, we see off in the distance the fields of wheat and barley, the city walls right next to the river, and as well, right smack dab in the city is the temple complex itself. People are living kind of very much shared homes where we're kind of going down and we can kind of go and see through there. But we want to again point out this idea of expanding and being an example of one of these early civilizations. Now, the nice thing about the ziggurat of Ur, it's still around today, and you could go visit here in the early 1900s, and you can go visit it today. And if you're looking at it, you're saying, "Oh, Mr. Kramer, that's a pretty nice ziggurat that they've got there. It looks a lot nicer than it did 100 years ago," and that's because in the 1990s, the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, decided, man, my people really don't need a functioning electrical grid. They really don't need uh, plumbing to be able to be reliable. We should spend millions of dollars on resurfacing and refinishing the ziggurat of Ur. So millions of dollars were poured into it to make it really look nice. And again, something you could go and visit when you're next scenic tour of Iraq that you're on. But when the United States goes and invades Iraq, we got American Marines that can go up the ziggurat there. So very much something that's still around today, and some money has been put into it to make it at least a little bit reconstruction from what it was. And again, these ziggurats are without or throughout all the different Sumerian city states and are very central to the worship, political, economic governance of the city. As we've touched on, the frequent wars between the Sumerian city-states begin to increase in ferocity and frequency after 3000 BC. So there's constant wars between the different city-states erupting. And what we see here is that during a time of war, a warrior would be chosen to lead the city, and those temple priests would kind of be given a back seat. Then when the war is over, you kind of give that power away. But because the wars become so frequent, you don't want to not be prepared for an invasion, for an attack, to go on the offensive. And eventually the warriors are given permanent control. And what we see develop from this are dynasties where a series of rulers from one single family then is given charge. And we begin to work more towards kind of a modern framework of understanding of how a monarchy works with one person in charge. Still not there just yet, but we want to see that over about 1,000 years, we begin to move from the temple priests and the religious authority being the sole ultimate authority in these city-states to now being a military leader, and winning military campaigns is also, if not more important. By 2500 BC, we see numerous city-states all over the Fertile Crescent. The Sumerians are trading and exchanging products and ideas with each other when they're not fighting, and that's going to lead to a process called cultural diffusion. So we're mentioning it here in this unit, but this is something that we'll see again and again and again and again throughout world history. And this is something that's very much going on today called cultural diffusion. And this is a process in which a new idea or product spreads from one culture to another. So the idea that I'm using computer browse to interact with my computer screen, a person from another culture says, "Ooh, I like that much better than the trackpad or the old 1990s trackball on there." So I'm going to do that, and now we see computer mice going from one place to another. It's very much what we see in terms of the United States and it kind of exporting its culture around the globe. How do people in Africa and South America and the Caribbean and in Siberia know about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? Because of movies. And they kind of brings this idea of being an American to these places. It's why you can go to the middle of China and see people walking around in Kobe Bryant jerseys and Levi's jeans. And this is how these products and ideas are able to move. Now, it's easy to stop a product from getting into a place. It's a lot harder, as we'll see repeatedly throughout history, trying to stop an idea from spreading from one culture to another. And that's what we begin to see in this transition of the religious leaders of ancient Samaria kind of having their power co-opted and moved into, and kind of being seen as equal to the warriors, and then having that power kind of be stripped away to where just the political authority is the ultimate authority in these different places. The Sumerians are a polytheistic religion. Polytheism is where you believe in more than one God. So at a Christian Catholic school that we're at, we are monotheists. We believe in one singular God. The Sumerians and their religion is an example of believing in more than one God. So we see big important gods that we could go and talk all day about, but we see Enlil, who's the god of storms and air. And you've got demons who are going out there. So you might pray to Ugalu, who are demons who protected you against even evil or demons. So that's what we see. Now, we kind of get a window into the insight of the Sumerian religion thanks to their cuneiform writing. And we see this through other more recent polytheistic religions, but really with the Sumerian religion, what marks this from some of the animal deities and other things that have come before is that these gods are all powerful and immortal, but they're also very human-like. Maybe not so much as we see pictures and depictions of them as physical human forms, but very much human-like in wants and needs and desires, that fall in love, that get angry, that want revenge, that show compassion. So that's what we go and we see in these. And as these gods have emotions, you need to worship and sacrifice for these gods to be able to provide them things that they need to show your devotion, so that they don't strike you down or cast you out or bring fire and brimstone upon you. And we see this through physical evidence, say like the construction of ziggurats, as well as in writings. Now, we talked about this in a question of the day, and this is an important idea, particularly if we want to compare and contrast Sumerian religion with the religion of the Egyptians that will come after. And these are two interesting case studies because on paper, both these societies should be relatively simple, or relatively similar. Nile River in Egypt, Tigris and Euphrates in the Mesopotamia, both flood. Both of those floodwaters deposit silt. The people then go and are able to use the waters of the river as well as the fertile soil to then grow their crops. And yet, the religions of both are very strikingly different. The Egyptians have a pretty easy life. The flooding of the Nile River is like clockwork. It's pretty easy. And so the gods are, in essence, in theory, nice to the Egyptians. So the Egyptians are expecting things from their god and have a nice afterlife. The Tigris and Euphrates flood frequently. However, they flood at infrequent times, meaning that they're not flooding like the Nile does, like clockwork, and you can almost set your clock to it. The Tigris and Euphrates very much are flooding and random and destructively. And so you really can't know what's going to happen when you plant your seeds, whether those seeds are going to get the right water that they need or they're going to get too much, or worst case scenario, right before you're about to harvest, the floods come and wipe everything away. So this shows to the Sumerians the gods are fickle, the gods are changing their minds, are constantly, you can't depend on the gods. Therefore, in the afterlife, you can't depend on the gods either. And so what we see are the Sumerians very much with their much harder worldview and how they're having to work a lot harder than other peoples, particularly the Egyptians. That hardness and toughness of their life transitions into their beliefs in the afterlife of having little expected from the gods after death. Right? The souls go to the land of no return. And the book has a quote where dust is their fare and clay is their food, where you are hunted by demons, right, as you're running and kind of trying to survive. And so this kind of very bleak afterlife very much is reflection of the tough living conditions and the nearly constant hard work you need in order to be able to strike a living in ancient Mesopotamia. We learn a lot about the Sumerian religion from the cuneiform tablets, and one of the surviving stories that we get from these cuneiform tablets is called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Summarizing, it's just a Sumerian mythological poem about a young hero, Gilgamesh, learning the limitations of human existence. And he's going and he's learning about the gods, and he's kind of a demigod slash a really great human. He's got some powers and some stories and this, and he's kind of working in between the gods and the humans to help the humans out. One of the things that Gilgamesh does, and one of the stories that comes from there, is Gilgamesh sneaks from the gods and steals the power of fire to give to the people on Earth. And the gods are like, ooh, that rascal Gilgamesh, we're kind of upset with them. But they kind of let it go. And the people then, using fire, can stay up later, start having parties, and making a ruckus, keeps the gods up late at night. So the gods decide we can't stand this. So they bring a giant flood to flood the earth to try to be able to kill all the humans. Gilgamesh learns about this, is able to construct a boat, gets as many people as he can on to survive these floods. When the waters recedes, he lets them out. And if you're sitting there going, tapping your chin, saying, this sounds pretty familiar, it's very similar to, and it's got a lot of the same story beat points to Noah's Ark story from the Old Testament in the Bible. And the question becomes, okay, these are very similar. This is an event that happened, and also understanding that the Epic of Gilgamesh predated the Noah flood story. And that's the important part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and make sure we get this because we'll see this not only on our quiz for the unit, but on our final exam, is that the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest surviving stories in the world, period. It's one of the very oldest stories that we have written down, right? That in its oldest form, we can go and we can see from the people themselves, from the horse's mouth, if you will, to be able to go and see what jokes did they laugh at, what did they find funny, what did they find scary, and it becomes a window into their world that we then can go and mesh and kind of go and change. So that's why, in a grander, big picture world history scheme, the Epic of Gilgamesh is important because, again, one of the oldest surviving stories in the entire world. We again we want to understand that there's tough life for the Sumerian people, and so they have a tough afterlife. Here we see one of the gods being lowered into a well and being tortured by different demons and monsters and other stuff. We've got demons here, and then again, he takes people like the other gods as well as Gilgamesh to go and kind of bring order to the society. And you can go online and you can go and we can research all the different gods, but we see very similar in what we'll see again with, say, the Egyptian religion and the Greeks and the Romans is that these gods are very powerful, but sometimes are very powerful in just limited ways. And we'll dive more into that when we get into the other religions, when we're dive a little bit deeper into those religions. So this is kind of the stuff that you're going and doing. It's hard life. So you've got demons that are out there, but some demons are nicer than others. So you might have this Ugalu in your home that you're praying to be able to protect you from other even evil or nastier demons. The old adage of the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of idea. And that's what we're going and doing. And we see priestesses and people who have powers to communicate with the gods or fend off these demons, being able to go and have kind of, I don't know, power is not the right way, cachet, kind of a relevance to the others around them. And so we see a burial here of someone with a kind of, this is a understand to be a priestess or a witch, if you have you, with her eyeball there that's replaced her actual one. So just want to finish up real fast. We just want to touch on some things because we got to move on to some other groups. For four social classes in Sumerian society, at the tippity top of our social pyramid, you got kings, landholders, and some of the priests. Below them are wealthy merchants, people who worked in the fields and shopped. And the lowest, you've got slaves. So slavery, not a big part of the Sumerian economy. It's something that is going to happen again. We see slavery all over the place throughout human history. And the slaves in Sumerian society were mostly foreigners captured or people sold off into slavery to pay off some of their debts. In terms of science and technology from the Sumerians, they invented the wheel, the sail, the plow, the use of bronze. They used horses and camels for transportation, and something that will slow down a little bit, and we usually point this right where I'm standing in the classroom above me to the clock that's there. We see a base 60 number system used, and we see that in measuring time as well as circle circumference. The idea, if I spin around in a circle, I'm doing 360 degrees. Well, that comes from the Sumerians. The idea that there's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, and there's 24 hours in a day. That all comes from the Sumerians. And so when these every year the freshmen come in and they can't read the clock, you can curse the Sumerians for not making it a simpler system. And we'll see how their counting is going to have an effect on why we have that instead of like 100 degrees nice and round in a circle. They used arches, columns, ramps, pyramid shapes, and then cuneiform was their system of writing, and this is all stuff that we've touched on. So just want to introduce these ideas for what they're doing, but we've got to get on to some other people who are going to have bigger impacts on all world history as they're going and kind of working their way there. When we try to explain how we've got a base 60 number system, it very much comes how the Sumerians are counting. And that comes from taking your thumb and working through your different digits on your hands. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 as you're counting the different knuckles. And that's how they get the base 60 number system. And then the 12s, and there's 24 hours in a day, working your way that way. And that comes from the Sumerians. So instead of counting each individual finger to get base 10, they're counting the joints and on the knuckles on your hand, and that gets them 12 from your thumb. That's how they're doing their accounting, and that then has effects throughout their numeracy number system as well as their mathematics. So hopefully you've been having your Peoples of Mesopotamia chart on hand or handy. We're going to dive right into it after this, taking your notes and transferring it over there. But again, we finished that first column. We've talked about a whole bunch of all those different things. And now in our next lecture for the unit, we're going to be talking about two other peoples.